Hey everybody, this is Masterclass YouTube Masterclass. Sorry, I got that backwards. YouTube comes first because they're the ones that put on our stuff and they put it on their show, and it comes from YouTube. Like, YouTube's the one that sponsors the whole show. They had elected me to Masterclass because of my PhDs, and now we're teaching for COURSERA, which is a place that gives you credit for watching videos of lectures that then you take a final for, pay for, get financial aid for, and graduate with a reference. And then, if you got to know me as a professor and came to visit or something, which we'll deal with on a much later semester, then in that case you could get a reference that way if you were one of my students and had gone through the class and finished, say, last semester and turned in the final, which we had. So far, I've only gotten really like 6 or 7 finals, but turned into, is what Coursera is saying. It's like a steady chance of getting 1 or 2 finals turned in every other week. And I was thinking, well, that's pretty good because we started a class that already 7 people have finished. And that's weird because we only came in late last semester. And the last semester was so late that we had to lengthen out another lecture after this semester's over, which is in 5 classes or 6 classes. But I don't think I'm going to tag on a final class. I'll just give the final. But if you pay for it through Coursera, then you get the units, and this is 4 units of undergraduate or even graduate if you are already in the program at Harvard, USC, and UCLA. Now that at Harvard it's an elective means that it's not necessarily for a major, because we haven't set up a major program there yet. There's several people that are trying to help out. So far it's kind of difficult because a lot of us that want to donate are still, waiting. We're still got the donation from school, paid off school, and now we're like want to donate to them. So it's like if the school itself wants to keep it as elective credit, that means there's not really, it doesn't go towards a major, but everyone needs elective credit when they're getting a major in undergraduate school anyway. So it's a really good way to score elective credit. And I don't want to worry about not explaining that earlier, because most of the people enrolled in college that have ever enrolled in class can get the fact that the elective credit is not towards a major, because even comparative literature, which is somewhat similar to a movie degree, a film degree, a critical studies film degree, is that the other degrees that are not critical studies reviews or whatever, and the film reviews or whatever, are geared towards students that are going to have to collect electives anyway. And since they have to collect electives anyway, they're going to need to get through school with courses like film studies. But comparative lit is similar to that. But I'm not saying you could be a science, biology, psychology. You can be a major in gerontology, which is really lucrative, actually. And you could be a major in all these different subjects and classes and take this film class for 4 units. That it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. It's up to the challenge. I mean, that the USC class gets the same version is to show everyone that USC has hard classes and Harvard has hard classes. And you think those classes are hard, just wait till you get to the hardness. And everybody loves a challenge in school, but we're talking real challenge, and it's CALARTS, where I got the final PhD, which is really hard because, and some people are even thinking, wow, that's so hard to get that you shouldn't tell anyone. Well, I have to, because it's part of my job as Masterclass, and we're delivering the show there. So if we've already been validated at USC and UCLA, we should sit in as a pretty good limit for Harvard's electives. So if you were taking not a film degree, which hasn't come together at Harvard, and I'm trying to work on seeing if they'll do that, but they said there have to be certain units covered, specified, taught by more teachers coming in. There definitely has to be more teachers coming in. So if you're a teacher and you're seeing this and you're like, this is the real deal, you want to teach there remotely for there, but you have to have a knowledge of the subject matter, which there are people in every university that's doing media studies would have a good knowledge of it. And why Harvard needs a film school? Well, they don't necessarily do, but it's a really good study. And if you can justify everything as studyable, then why isn't there a film school everywhere? Because everybody studies movies. They want to know what makes a camera work. They want to know what makes a TV work. They want to know what makes a projection booth work, and they want to know what's on it and why it's on it and why it's there. So that's a subject matter that gets so deep into every other topic, although philosophy would say that it's the only crossbreed of every other topic, that every topic comes back to philosophy and it goes off into another philosophy that it came from. usually from one and to another. So we have philosophy now meeting us at the juncture of saying, well, why does film exist, and why did it come in so late, and why was it industrial, and why is it industrial? And one question we can ask ourselves right now in society is, why does it seem like Hollywood's not releasing anything? And I think that's more of a present pretense question of like, we're getting impatient when are the films coming out, and everyone's like, oh, there's already films, and there's other films too, but not all of them have been released. The release schedule got off. The commercial movie business is expensive. They're going to have to wait a while before they recuperate enough, or at least wait until the marker comes. And I had said that Dune 2 is coming out in 2024. Even if it doesn't, I'm not going to lose faith in Hollywood. I mean, come on now. Even if in like 10 years an RKO movie that was never discovered comes out on the internet, that all the companies have moved to the internet and that Hollywood's on the internet is very true. And that the streaming media shows that Hollywood didn't die is very important, because all over Facebook, Twitter, pages like YouTube especially, have a lot of Hollywood shiznit on it. I mean, there's a lot of Hollywood stuff. So for all of us that are watching TV, going, where'd the movie go? Where'd the movie go? And then 10 movies come out on Netflix. I was like, 10 movies just came out on Netflix. That's crazy. Because I saw one on YouTube that was like this one. You know, everyone's like seeing all. There's a boom of movies, actually, independent and big directors. Where we're all saying, oh, Hollywood's dead, Hollywood's dead. Hollywood's not dead. They're just all online. And the weird part about me is I've been online this whole time, and then I check and I'm like, did you guys know Hollywood was online? And then I turn it off and I'm like, well, that's weird, because I didn't think they were still making movies, and sometimes I forget when I'm talking about Hollywood. I'm like, well, I wish they'd release Dune 2, and meanwhile, there's like 20 different versions of animated Dunes somewhere on the internet, and then they're like all banned the next day, and there's this whole conflagration. So, yes, there are still people out there, and I'm like, well, geez, I mean, I'm not as big as I used to be, because now everyone's on the internet. That's cool. But I like the way that, I was like, I was the only one on the internet. Now everybody's on. And it wasn't me that started the trend, believe me. But I'm like, I'm just saying, like, it wasn't because of me or anything that it happened. It was like, I was just amazed that it bumped me off course saying, well, Hollywood's gone. And then I go on the internet and I go, Hollywood's still here. Hollywood's gone in the theater. And then I saw the Martin Scorsese movie and realized that was the ultimate primeval funeral to the whole history of cinema. And not that it was bad, but it was great. But it just is so devastating, humorlessly, that the Native Americans were treated so bad that now we're sitting here thinking, do we even deserve to have the privilege of cinema in our life? If this can happen, and these movies today will help you answer that question. First of all, we're going to start these in order. So, I don't know. These are 3 auteur films from Europe. And I apologize for always sharing the European medium, but I think it's more drastic in this class to share the European medium because of how often taught the English medium, the American medium, is taught. And the British medium is like the European medium, which isn't taught as well and not as often, but that they're classes that are really valuable because you can learn a history of filmmaking is interesting. For instance, I had this foreign film called T-Min, T-I-H-M-I-N-H, and this really fascinating observance I made with the third part of it through the movie. It's a 5-hour movie, and I watched it all at once, overnight once. And 3 hours into it, I saw this part where this guy in a turban, T-Min in this turban, was staring at this mirror, and then he looked away from the mirror, and then this big mirror turns, like Fuyad always has the trap doors that are turning. This mirror turns, and if you're watching the film on your TV and you see the shot, they must have revamped the DVD to do it too. Somehow, and I think I figured out how, but I'm not going to share that now. But the mirror flipped, and you can see yourself on your TV on the reflection. Now, how weird is that? Because I saw my tree out back in the yard in front of the TV, and it was like, looked like it was on the mirror. It was already reflecting, but it was a real mirror reflector. I don't know if that's true. We'll have to see if that's an urban legend, because you yourself will have to see T-Min, because I looked at the tape and I'm like, wow, I'm in a Fuyard movie. How'd that happen? It's like, smile, you're in a Fuyard movie, because the mirror sees you and he sees the mirror. But he doesn't really see the mirror, but how could he not? Because he's holding it, because it's being reflected, not just by a digital effect, because Fuyard was not a digital director. I mean, he shot film with 35 millimeter on those big chunks of multicolored wrapped. And multicolored, I don't mean like it was in color, but there was one color tinting the whole screen, like blue, yellow, or white, and switch off it's a blue screen. Switch on, it's a white screen. And that he had to splice the footage there wasn't exactly true because they limited where the film stock hit on the button between the dark and the light. So they all timed it together so that it was mathematically set up earlier. Isn't that wild that there was a director that was like an astrophysicist before them all? That existed, of course, in France. Now, we're moving from France to Spain, and these are the auteur movies from Europe that have interested all so much and have been the broken-hearted saviors of the cinema. Now, that we start in Mexico, actually. And one thing I want to say about Mexico is I was real sorry to see the whole place just like be shut down or something. If anything hurt Mexico because of our country, I'm personally apologizing because I've never actually been there, but I have a lot of friends from there, and they say it's a pretty cool place. And I haven't heard like anyone really report too bad about it. Most of the movies I've seen about it seemed all right. You know, I mean, if the Wild Bunch was all that happened in Mexico, I'd still like it. I mean, it happened there, so why not think that's cool? You know, it's like, oh, because they all died? Well, they all went down for a legend. They filmed they actually put together another Wild Bunch at the end of the Wild Bunch. The Wild Bunch are all dead, then why do the new Wild Bunch get up and ride off? But Los Olvidados, let's switch gears. That's Hollywood. This is Mexican cinema. Now, Mexican cinema has been off and on throughout the ages because until the time of the sound era, there wasn't really a Mexican film that had played internationally to other audiences, except for a few versions of different, like even vampire films as early as the silent era. That most of the prints from Mexico's history lead up to some kind of either catastrophe or delinquency isn't necessarily the same as other mediums that reach a certain point that they try so much at once that it can be problematic. But that's not what Mexican cinema is like, because it guards the money and it saves the money and burns it up. But that's because the government is helping pay for the films, and they're not really a socialist government. If you think about it, they're kind of a conservative republic. And then, like, the thing about a conservative republic is they have a Republican as their leader, and that they pretty much have an agrarian life, and that some stereotyped illegal immigrants. Well, I just got to say, and I'm not political, the last time I checked, America's a free country, so if anybody wants to move in, go ahead, dude. I'm not going to stop them. And this isn't MASTERCLASS to get all political. I just have views like, well, let's see, the Mexicans are cool, yes, so don't close their country and let them come back and forth as they want. I mean, half of them were running the Senate anyway. You know, they're old Latinos in the workplace. Be nice to each other. Just because. But anyway, this was not the point. Mexico, it thrives on these old legends of all these heroes and thrives on these legends of old gods. And in the silent era serial films, we're seeing like these comic book like fantasies. But then we move on to the sound era. And to be honest, these early like flesh and blood, but like with not Garbo, but like these Mexican kind of throw off actors are kind of being like Hollywood. They're kind of playing it up, but they're not really stereotypical. And they're not too bad. They're kind of soft, edgy, these romantic Mexican films. And then the real era hits with Macario. And I'll tell you, it's the one where the camera starts out coming in, and this was like a modernist breakthrough film, and it's from like the late 40s, early 50s Mexico. The print was totally lost for a long time. It's only showed once or twice on TV, on Turner Classic Movies. And these candles goes whizzing around this room, and there's this camera following the candles, and it's like seeing all these beautiful things, and then the film puts you to sleep. So forget about the last thing I said about seeing the mirror. Try watching Macario really closely with your eyes on the screen and not getting hypnotized. And if you think it's illegal to hypnotize with cinema, you might as well ban all cinema. Because there's always one hypnosis scene in a movie that's making the spectator go, wow, that apple pie looks really good from here. You know? I'm not saying that like all addictive chemicals are laced with subliminal messages, but I might as well put subliminal messages in my show to prove that they are true, but since I'm talking about them, it kind of deactivates them, right? But not really. So Macario hypnotizes you, puts you to sleep, and this is so controversial. You have a good dream, but you're dreaming about the movie. My version was with an old man that had a chicken that had a daughter on a truck, and he was a nice guy, and he was shoveling some hay on there, and she was kind of playing with him, and he's kind of walking back and forth. I mean, I can remember that image, but that I was totally asleep, dreaming hypnotized. And you may say, well, that sounds totally like irrational, but hypnosis has been declared rational. Dreaming is rational. Sleepwalking to Mexico? Impossible. So you tell me. But now we've got to the real main event, Los Olvidados, which means Young and the Damned. And you've got to remember these Cocteau-like directors that made like Macario and eventually Salt of the Earth directors in America were Mexican Americans making movies. And Salt of the Earth is one of those really underrated movies that I thought, well, Salt of the Earth's okay, but I wish they had bigger production. And I didn't know much about cinema. I thought that the more expensive it was, then that meant more was riding on it and it was better. But that doesn't make it. We realize now that money is relative. We could have spent $5 on it and it was really expensive, or we could have spent $1 million on it and didn't know how. But if the money is relative to the fact that some of us that are making the $1 pictures and the $1,000 pictures revere all movies as good. So why, if all movies are good, the rich ones are only bad and the poor ones are good, or the poor ones are only good and the rich ones are only bad? No one should really have this like, well, that's the money it was attached to, so that's why it's good or bad. You know, James Cameron's bad because he spends so much money, but all these cheap films are great because they make cheap films. That's not the point. They're filmmakers. They make movies. Whether they got a budget or not, and if they have a budget, great. If they don't have a budget, great. We can make the movie. But it's easier to do that now with the digital revolution and digital technology. So that these movies that are like Cinema Povera of Mexico attracted director Luis Buñuel. And we discussed Luis Buñuel. He goes from all the things, Los Olvidados, and before to Un Chien Andalou with Salvador Dali, where the eye gets cut in half and you see the moon go by and it's like the heart-shaped box and the nun and the bugs through a wall, bugs through a hand. And it's a 19-minute movie, and it changed the face of avant-garde all over the world. Well, later on in L'Age d'Or, we talked about that gruesome scene from that, and where that lady's eating the statue. That was terrible. And so Luis Buñuel's having this really good career. One thing he surrounds himself in is controversy. That's why he doesn't go to many film festivals and stuff, because he's totally subversive, totally controversial, totally makes people think about these publicity things that are way more crazy than any publicity scheme we've ever heard of. Luis Buñuel will talk up a subversive topic, how much he hates it, and then make a movie about it. That honestly, The Discreet Object of My Desire is the only one where he has like an optimistic outcome, and it's only because they both realize that they're the same actress and the same person, and so there is still a subversive conflict with Discreet Object of Desire and the two women that play the lead part that are the same person in the movie. But why not? I mean, Bob Dylan's been played by 6 characters in one movie, and one of them was Cate Blanchett. And now we have Los Olvidados cover again. Now here we have a movie that's not about myths or gods or anything. Buñuel comes to Mexico. And you would think, well, what's Buñuel going to make in Mexico? Not a traditional bullfight film like we used to have from Mexico. Those were good early sound films. It's about young kids, and they're never really seen in movies, and that they're poor is totally of the way it shows it. And that a woman's raising them all with this kind of place, this kind of house for her sons, and all of her sons' friends are there, but they're like, they have to form a gang to survive, and to form a gang to survive is how they live, and that they're young, like we're talking 13, 14 years old, and that they go on an adventure out in the city of Mexico is an understatement, because they live out in the streets of Mexico, they die out in the streets of Mexico, and they fight and steal and harass each other and harass everybody out in the streets. And that they're at home doing the same thing is partly how they're having fun with some of it, they're having fun with all of it, that actually this movie's less controversial than you think, because it seems to be one of those films where Luis Buñuel doesn't really want to reveal a smoking gun, although the Oedipal value of the young star of the movie, and these are all non-professionals, so star is the wrong word, the young child in the movie that's 13 that's telling the story, and he's kind of narrating it, but there's narration, there's other ways of telling the story, but his friend develops this sick love for his mother, but it's not really sick, because really a mom and a young kid is controversial, because that was the controversy of the film, was that this young kid slept with this kid's mom, and they're thinking, oh, that sounds terrible, but it's actually like pretty goodly done, because he doesn't like do it by force, and she was totally into it, and nobody cares, and like the kid, when he finds out's a little pissed, but even at the end he can live with it. It's not like he's gonna like go out and die in the circle, which actually there is kind of a projection of that in a weird way, that he's gonna go die in the circle, but he doesn't go die in the circle, and I mean the main center square of the big set that they're playing on, this big set of Mexico that has every kind of like structure of camera and devices, but it's kind of shot like a classical film, only with like a muffle of a documentary over it, because it seems like it's more like a classical film in the way it's more, or poetic realism, where it stages all the action inside the frame and kind of builds a match on action through the side movements of the cameras, or if it goes down and up. But really, if it goes side to side, then you chop to the next square over, but you do it by moving the actual camera, but still capturing the action. But with the action constantly moving, then you have kind of these crowds in the middle of Mexico, and these kids that are stealing, running away with the money, that they're all doing it to survive and eat, that they give their mom the loot, that they're a total underground gang, is not a point of the film that you don't stop really thinking these kids are cool. And they're cool, and they do commit crimes, and yeah, some of them are going to have the crime and punishment factor coming up soon. Sorry to say that Russian, but so I'm thinking Los Olvidados 4 stars. That you see, this box is written in Spanish on the back, and that it's in Español es cierto, pero no me entiende todos cobrían. But I don't understand this cover entirely, because it's in really, really like well-written Spanish, like not well-written, but big words. And like, I think they might even have the word existentialism on here in Spanish, but nobody knows what that word is in Spanish because it's meaningless and it doesn't exist. But that's because, so here's the clincher before I go on to the next film. Luis Buñuel, after directing this, which seemed his tamest, although still controversial film, seemed to be something that was showing the spirit of human life, the spirit of these young men, rites of passage, enter Sandman. You know, these guys are getting up, taking care of business. That the rules and ethics and morals of life are played out in the affairs of the national cinema of Mexico have never been so fervently portrayed by non-professional Mexican actors, and that they're all doing a fine job of Shakespearean quality scenes and realistically gritty barrios, and for lack of a better word, that's a neighborhood that there's gangsters in or something. And that all works out, but all doesn't, and that it's ambiguous, no closure is kind of modern, that it kind of just kicks on in media res, and the kids are just doing their thing at the beginning and doesn't really take the time to introduce everyone. That's okay. I say it's one of the best films ever made. When I saw it, I couldn't believe that it was so realistic and that it was so much easier going than most everyone's I talked to life in general, and it was still called The Young and the Damned, and it's not a fantasy film about the good life, but I've talked to so many people that said, oh, I've had it worse than that. They didn't really have it that bad. And I'm like thinking, you know what, they had it pretty bad, because they're getting kicked around and they're getting shoved around, but I think more of the people I talked to were just relating to the circumstances they had, because they might have had things in their life that were bad too, so I'm not deranking anybody. I'm just saying, dude, if it was worse than Los Olvidados, I'm sorry that happened to you. But Los Olvidados kind of encourages that anyway, which is why, the main reason, you'll never believe this, why Mexico banned it. Mexico banned Los Olvidados because they kicked Buñuel out and he was deported back to Spain and told never to come back again. Now, was it for his hijinks of publicity and hiding like hair moths on the edge of elderberry tables and stuff? I don't think so. I think he was a prankster, and he did one time bring the toilet to dinner and had to put it in discreet charm or bourgeoisie, yes. But was he kicked out for something illegal? Probably not. He knew he had to obey Mexican law, or he'd go to prison after he got back, because the Spanish ordered him to obey Mexican law. And usually when you're ordered to obey law, that means they're going to surveil you to watch you to make sure you don't break the Mexican law. And that he was coming with his passport from Spain is interesting, but that the excommunication made his career more important, and he made Belle de Jour in Spain, which he was going to anyway, and that Buñuel went on to direct and tell The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie and The Obscure Object of My Desire into the 70s, that he had a long, lucrative career. It was really almost one of those things that you would have said, well, did Mexico fire him so he'd have publicity? Is like, no, but Mexico fired me and it gave me a bunch of publicity. See how easy that is to turn around? And because he didn't intend for it, nor would have ever asked him to, but he's fine with the fact that he did get publicity out of their kicking him out of Mexico. It's become so notorious that because of the reason he got kicked out. Now, here's the reason. Because the film suggests that anyone's life could be as bad as this or worse, and there were conversations going around, well, my life's worse. Well, I don't have that bad a life. That conversation I brought up that was so braille and rickety, you're thinking that's the very conversation that got it banned. So be careful with that one, because you might say, oh man, some things happened in my family that were so much worse, and then suddenly you're getting harangued by like counselors saying, oh, you need to talk to us about how bad your family were, even though that was 20 years ago, we need to know, you know? So it's the weirdest part. They started interrogating Buñuel, like, did you make this to show it as though it were today's people, and that's why they're all getting along so badly? He's like, well, they have it bad, but I'm not saying this for all people or whatever, you know. And it's like, well, are you accusing us that we've all had it this bad? So now they're asking contradictory questions. Look it up. I'm telling you, it's in film comment like 37 or 36, and it says that Buñuel was kicked out because they were second guessing his implications of why he represented Mexicans in either better or worse light, or in a sketchy or non-sketchy, which is sketchy anyway, that it uses the word, way of Mexicans. So why is everybody so delicate about the picture of Mexicans? Well, we see all throughout cinema the racist stereotype commonly used in America is the Mexican stereotype. That's like everybody in Mexico turns into Speedy Gonzales. Now, I'm not saying Speedy Gonzales is a bad character and that I don't think of him as Mexican, because that'd be rude. But it's rude to call every Mexican you ever meet Speedy Gonzales. And I'm not trying to be lewd or rude, maybe a little funny, because the point is the, you know, stereotype is like we're playing out the characteristics so bad. Now, Cheech and Chong is a different matter, because we all know that they're fine and they're East LA and they're totally the same as any other American. Like, you know, Cheech and Chong may have immigrated in, but they brought us so much pot that we forgave them. You know, it's like, but, you know, it's only the ones that bring big loads of pot and give them to us. No, I'm kidding. But the thing is like Cheech and Chong are really caught up to current times, so I don't really think their style is outdated and kind of, they're overblown, but they're not sitting there like, how can we make fun of our own race, you know? And sometimes Americans will be like, how can we make fun of that race? And we never admit to it, so I won't bring it up. But, you know, it's like, how can we make fun of that race in a good way? You know, like that's going to be a real good idea. What I like about Los Olvidados is it makes us second guess all movies, not just from Mexico, but every movie. Did they portray that race the right way like they did in Los Olvidados? And I'm like, well, you can't be like the race portrayed in Los Olvidados, and who knows, maybe that wasn't portraying the race, or who knows if we can ever depict our own race, or who knows if we can tell all the things the characters go through in another race. And I think that's really wild about it, because I don't know of anything about anyone of any race that's going to make me mad for the race alone. Why would that make me mad? Oh, geez, you're a Mexican? Geez, that ruined you, dude. You're out of here. Mexicans out, you know. I'm like, everybody else, you know, South Koreans are fine, but Mexicans, no, not allowed in my house. I mean, who picks and chooses that? I know some ethnicities have real trouble with this and be like, I'm mad at this guy, I'm mad at this guy, and it's only because of their race. Guess what happens to those people that don't like other people of other races? They don't go to college because they won't let you judge someone by race in college. Get a book, learn something, get a better job, and go to college. Because if you go to college, they won't let you be racist. But before I get done tirade before you that you all know racism is bad, there's a lot of the sentiment that some ethnicities should be left alone because they're isolationist, and of course they're going to be racist anyway. So hey, if that's your deal, of course you're going to be racist anyway, then I'm not going to come any near you still with a college. I'm going to be like, well, you know, and you turned out to be a total Nazi that was comparing me to other movies, whether they were real or not. So yeah, I'm not going to go pick you up as a student. If I'm a college, I'm not going to say like, hello, sir, you just said a really bad word that could be hurtful against a racial person. Well, we'll put that down in your file, but did you say you're applying to Harvard? Oh, okay, you're applying to Harvard and you put a dirty word, a bad word about someone from another race. You know that's hate speech, right? Okay, well, we'll consider you for an application. All right, we'll talk to you later. I mean, you see what I'm getting at? So if you're going to put it in a movie or book or music, consider that the whole world's going to see it. And I've had a few things that I've had to take away, whether people wanted me to or not, because it just didn't work for the whole world. The Los Olvidados may not be the tamest comparison of a lifestyle of Mexicans, but that it's a tame comparison of some of the other stereotypes I've seen, that it seems so mild in lack of stereotypes that it seems pretty realistic, and that's the whole documentary effect of it, capturing it. And I'm not saying other movies from Mexico weren't as good. And we've kind of gone through this Mexico revolution with, Birdman and The Revenant and, Guillermo del Toro and all his magical work, like The Devil's Backbone. And we've seen these Mexican directors like Amenabar, and we've seen like the Spanish director, even Almodovar, come back with this new Spanish cinema that's really affected the new Mexican cinema, and their countries are really linked, not just from the Buñuel connection, but from a long time history of Spanish and Mexico and trade agreements between them. So there's these trade agreements and they're going on. And what's weird is I was just talking about the movie Apocalypto the other day, and it seems like the Maya and Aztec thing's a little played up in it, but not really to a degrading level. But then you get to a movie like Los Olvidados, and then you start to think that even Apocalypto looks a little stagey. And then you think maybe movies aren't as realistic as this one, and maybe the people in this movie are a lot more realistic at their part, like almost beyond Bresson. That's one of my favorite things about it. It's really like taking pictures of some survivalist method children that are preparing for the Holocaust and know that their city's destroyed, and then they're just going to destroy part of it so they can get part of it, but that they're so innocent in doing it because they're so poor from already having been destroyed in the city, and everybody goes home and goes to bed, and dude's friend sleeps with his mom, and then everything goes wild. And I say it that way to get the Buñuel effect, because that's the shocking conclusion, is there's more to the movie even than that. There's a little bit of beating up, there's a little bit of going to jail, there's a little bit of carousel action in that movie. The whole thing's wild. You forget where they all go on their adventure. But we'll say that's it for Los Olvidados for now. We're gonna have to go faster than the fire here to get through some of this stuff, but we're halfway through the class. I want to thank you for joining the MASTERCLASS by COURSERA YouTube, and that the YouTubes are the gods of all. And we've got this classical music in the background. It's great. All right, next movie. We're talking now, and this is a little out of sequence from the movies I want to show, but I think this one might take some time to review, and it's Aguirre, the Wrath of God, 1977, Werner Herzog. And that Los Olvidados was 1959, Luis Buñuel. I don't really mention dates a lot in this class, and someone said that was a flaw, but they weren't a professor, and I said, well, we talk about eras. And one thing about film eras is you got to know what the film eras are to talk about it. So, we could go through it real fast, but I'll just give you some comparisons. From the teens, 1895 was the invention, December 12th, 1895. And through the years, the cinema changed in many ways, but by 1910, most movies started looking as the same as even as they are now. Because from 1910, they developed the standard mode of representation, or the language of cinema. Because of Griffith and Porter, they combined their styles into what was used as the American syntax. The American syntax blew up all over the world because it was everything stylistically composed to look like nothing's being stylistically composed. And why they do that is so you go into the film, and I don't mean by a flipping mirror. But the 20s was the jazz age, silent era at its best years of cinema. 30s was the sound era, with Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz, Stagecoach, which I don't know which one of those movies made more box office. I was looking it up the other day, and I actually saw that Stagecoach made all the money than Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. I was like, Stagecoach made the money? That's wild. And even continues to at an even bigger rate. The 40s, film noir, Citizen Kane, and you can just define those eras by like those films. Like by the time you get to the 60s, you define everything with Midnight Cowboy, Easy Rider, Wild Bunch, and The Graduate. And you're like, well, I just defined the whole era. And why we're not saying, well, this is the modern era. Well, the classic era is like 1910 probably to 1960, where the modern era comes in. The modern era comes in because of Psycho and Peeping Tom by Michael Powell and Hitchcock. That because the modern era comes in, we're now at the point of even more realism, even more nostalgia, even more spliced up narrative, hybridized genres. Spliced up narrative told asequentially or achronologically, diachronic, Synchronic is when it's all told, when everything follows the clock and goes in a line. Diachrotic means it skips parts all over the place and comes back. Gear of the Wrath of God. Now we're at the 70s, and we're talking about American film when we build that timeline. So now we get back to how I was talking about the Mexico timeline and how all timelines are different, And I would go through the 80s and say ET and all this stuff, but that's just for fun. You mark your own eras with your films that remind you of what it is. It's an era. So the German film industry, of course, was built by this giant studio in the silent era called UFA, and these kind of other European mediums relate to America. That these other European mediums relate to America is because they're catching an allegory from the American film and turning it around to match their politics, but they already got the idea before that, but then they saw an American film that they really want to go and hunk on, either to destroy it or create it, and that's the way they make movies, just making fun of or repeating American films. But the thing that's weird about that is then they find all these unique ways to make films. And then what's weird about that is it looks like nothing like the American film, and then the fact is you're not even sure if they really even referenced it, because their style's so different. But that Werner Herzog comes along in the 70s after UFA, the big studio, crashes after the Third Reich takes it over with Leni Riefenstahl and Fritz Lang, goes to America, and we will talk more about Fritz Lang, but we get to, we're already in the 50s with Germany, and they're still rebuilding their cinema. The Germany Year Zero by Rossellini comes out, and I talked about it, where the whole place of Berlin gets bombed out. The whole city's destroyed. A little kid's walking around looking for his parents, doesn't find them, leaps off a building to his death. I mean, Germany Year Zero, the documentary realist, we film it the day after it happened, exactly the way it happened, except we use stuntmen and Hollywood stuff that we're all quoting but not realizing it. And are realizing it but later not, and then suddenly it's like, well, we realized it but didn't, that there was a Hollywood film, and it's all just this obscure one that was only released in their country, and I think that's great. And so we have a Gear of the Wrath of God. Now this is Werner Herzog. He comes out in like the early 70s, basically the early 70s in Germany, even in the 60s we had Werner Herzog. That he had some films in the 60s is kind of questionable because he came from a film school era of German filmmakers, and that he made a movie called Third Generation as an 80s movie that's sci-fi and kind of shows that even past the Reich, they're stuck in this Reich, anti-Reich progression that we see in Fassbinder, who's the big auteur before Herzog, and that Herzog's completely different than Fassbinder, but that Fassbinder's a homosexual, we all realize, but that Werner Herzog's a breakout, wild, Apocalypse Now making director. Like the Coppola Apocalypse Now and A Gear of the Wrath of God have something in common, is they're going up a river to find the Holy Grail. They're going on a Holy Grail mission. It's the Searchers all over again. And then we think, why is Roger Ebert making this claim, which Roger Ebert, one of the greatest critics of all time, claimed, that what he loves about A Gear of the Wrath of God is that it's as reckless and epic as Apocalypse Now and Greed. And I thought, Greed hasn't come up. That's probably when Greed came back into circulation, was when he said that. And I thought they must have showed that at UCLA to Francis Ford Coppola or something, because whoever had that copy of Greed made me want to see Greed that day at this place called Rocket Video in LA. It's got every movie, and you go in and like they've got A Gear of the Wrath of God, and you're like, I've already seen that. But I haven't seen Greed. That was just coming in, and that whole Greed debate about how they released all that footage of Greed with the still photographs that were all filmed. And the reason they mentioned that is that was so reckless it met its end. It was like Magnificent Ambersons that got cut and retwisted around by people that didn't even care about cinema. Well, The Gear of the Wrath of God was the movie they could not make. Apocalypse Now, at least they could keep filming, even though they didn't think they'd ever do anything with it, and lost some film in the jungle. Well, that was 100 feet of film, but it's gone now, tolerated, But here's The Gear of the Wrath of God. They're going on a mission where they all have to wear knight in shining armor. This is the Ponce de Leon. This is Christopher Columbus. This is like everything we love about, the Inquisition. And we don't love anything about the Inquisition, right? But everything we love about the Inquisition should have been made the title of this movie. And then there's Santiago Cortez, and I could name on the people that are probably on this mission. And that, it's one of the Salt of the Earth things. You keep finding names in Salt of the Earth that come out in later Mexican movies, as we were saying, with Los Olvidados. But A Gear of the Wrath of God's interesting because it has this whole wrath of God into it, when you know that everybody in the film's a total existentialist atheist, like Nietzsche. Nietzsche, because he was interpreted as an existential atheist, all Germany became existential atheists, whether they supported the Reich or not, whether it was after the war or before the war or not. They, it's not like we as Americans can say, well, they were involved in the third generation, so therefore they do or do not support Hitler, which I don't support him at all. So, we're actually like telling Germany not to because they don't want the world to get out of control and chaotic again doesn't really necessitate the fact that the rest of the world really can tell anybody what to do, but then the rest of the world gets told by them what to do. So it all gets messed up. So they get told, so the Aguirre of the Wrath of God get told by the Spanish what to do. And it's the Spanish sending this German cast and German crew, and Klaus Kinski comes in, and he'd already been in like for a few dollars more in some other movies that he was the small part in Hollywood, but he'd been in some big films in Germany, that he'd done some work in Germany before Herzog. Is true that Herzog saw him in a movie, like was looking in a mirror, not a mirror can, but a mirror. He's looking in a mirror, and he sees the thing he's looking for, and it's the actor himself, says Buñuel, not Buñuel. Klaus Kinski, Werner Herzog, sorry. Now, Werner Herzog's a really nice guy. He's one of the nicest guys in the world. I had a conversation with him once at a theater, and we were watching this movie he made called Invincible with Tim Roth. And that Tim Roth was a really nice guy. I mean, that Werner Herzog's a really nice guy, and he answered a field of questions. And I noticed that in L.A., when everybody went to see him, everybody felt like they should just do nothing but praise him. And I thought, I'm doing the same, because that's what you do at a conference like that, only because you're there, because you want to send them praise. It's not some big, like I have to like you, so that's why I like you. That's one thing about filmmaking. No one has to like you. If there's no free will, at least we have it for whether we like or dislike a movie. Because somebody can tell you, no one liked that movie. And you can say, well, what if I do? And they're like, okay, you can. It's like, what is anybody hurting anybody else from liking a movie? But that since everybody's like, you can like whatever movie you can, in the real world, a movie doesn't necessarily become you just because you love it and love the thing. You don't become the movie. I mean, that'd be like saying my favorite movie is World Trade Center, and that's the whole reason the thing happened. Or like Doctor Strangelove's a real movie, that's the whole reason the world ended. Or Aguirre, the Wrath of God is so realistic, which it is. It's, again, like Los Olvidados, the props, the staging, the design, everything's put in there and built up like these strategical ways to make things look real. That its color is brilliant in Aguirre, the Wrath of God, that Los Olvidados is black and white. But Aguirre, the Wrath of God is in color. And every bit of it is that 70s hazy fog cover. And that they're going for the treasure, the city of the lost gold, the fountain of youth, what they can find is what they can get. And they're on a dangerous mission, and it's turning into a suicide mission. And everybody's dying, and the natives are dying. And there's this shot where the parade of the conquistadors, the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition and the conquistadors were going on this mission for the Fountain of Youth and the Lost City of Gold, so they say. But they were also inquisitors that killed everyone who wasn't them. Because let's face it, inquisitors always say they're killing everyone that's not in their religion. Well, they're killing also all those that claim to be not as good in their religion. So basically they're killing everyone that's not like them. And then he's got this daughter in the movie that's like, not Natasha Kinski, but she wasn't probably old enough yet, but there's this daughter, and she's like falling back in Aguirre's arms on the cover, and I'm thinking that was another controversial part, another part of this sort of like anti-Oedipal, or maybe reverse Oedipal, or even mirror Oedipal, where the daughter goes for the man, which is in the family romance Oedipus, where the daughter usually goes for the man so he can give her the phallogocentric keys to the kingdom. She desires to be with the man like her old man because she knows that she can't be with her old man. But now the whole mission's gone so crazy, and they're like being bit by mosquitoes, and there's monkeys everywhere, and they already brought this parade with them in this circus. They practically brought an elephant with them, and they're bringing everything up this big tunnel, and they come down in this other shot. Werner Herzog looks like he almost fell off a cliff a few times because he's the only one with this giant camera. It's like he had a cinematographer who used to go in, and he's like, I will inspect the spot while you shoot it. And that could be a style of German filmmaking. It could also be how Werner Herzog wanted to power the camera while the cinematographer told him what to shoot. It could also be just because it was a total eccentricity of the way they ran the set. And if it was all of the above, it doesn't really matter. It's none of my business. But the shots are staunchly photographed as though they're imprints of time. The imprints of time theory hits again. We're making a period piece, so it's removed metaphorically by the costume drama. But the repeat offender is that, like, if you put it in 70s context, the world looks like a Gear of the Wrath of God. I mean, that Apocalypse Now is coming is not even the point that greed is just now coming out in from archives with its less mashed performance. And that greed's been so mashed that by the time they find it in the 70s or even late 60s, but I'm thinking greed came out in the 70s again after the silent era, and they'd been again restoring silent film. Now, the greed came out in the 20s. That is not what I'm saying. The greed came out in the 70s. I'm saying it was re-released. And so now we've got Greed and Apocalypse Now and Gear of the Wrath of God on the same timeline, which proves Roger Ebert is God moving on. That they're reckless, that they're also running out of they're running out of money. The director and the people in the movie are running out of money. They're running out of supplies. They're running out of time. They're past the deadline. They've lost the mission. They're looking for the Holy Grail. They're about to die for it. Sea monsters approach. And every threshold guardian in the book keeps them from getting saved. But the Lost City of Gold and the Holy Grail and the Fountain of Youth and all that is all made up fairy tales. Dawn's all these explorers that turned that exact writing in. It was all a fairy tale. And now we're talking, you mean we're going all this way, didn't know where we were, mapping it all, finding out there's already natives in here, enslaving them, and taking our own slaves with us just to make it through this trip to find out we're going nowhere. We didn't go anywhere. The whole trip. We went on this whole adventure and there was no goal. There was no maze at the end. There was no message that we can defeat at the end. There's no threshold guardian. It's just dead. Death. Not even death. It's dead, not death. The river's dead. The plants are dead. The trees are dead. Everybody in the film is still alive, but it looks like they're dead because Klaus Kinski almost got killed by getting shot by Werner Herzog for trying to leave the set. But that he's not dead is true because we see Fitzcarraldo years later, and it's the one where they take that big ship up the river, and it's crazy that they have this Fitzcarraldo boat out on a river. But Klaus Kinski didn't really die. But he died in the movie for sure as the conquistador himself. That Aguirre that finishes the mission, but he's really not the lead conquistador for a while. There's these other conquistadors that are like, well, we're going to keep him in the back, and that Ponce de Leon, Christopher Columbus. I don't mean to thrash your guys' expectations, but the political statement of this isn't against, like, the Spanish Inquisition. It's about commercialism, kind of, and how commercialism blows all these things out of proportion, but always gives you the treasure at the end of the rainbow. There's always this big gold block for you at the end of the movie. Now, if the character in the movie makes lots of money at the end of the movie, it doesn't necessarily mean that I got lots of money in my pocket, unless I'm the director, because now I got a happy ending, and everybody thinks, well, my guy gets paid at the end of the movie, and that's the happy ending, so now everybody's happy. It's the smoking gun. That everybody somehow makes it out, that Superfly gets the money, is my favorite part of that movie, because I'm like, Superfly got the money, I'm going to go get some money. And I'm like, well, if that's true, then in Gear of the Wrath of God's no closure, it has an anti-closure device, because not only is there no money, there's nothing. It's a wasteland. It would have gotten into this beautiful land of the City of Gold had you lived for 5 more minutes, but now you're in the wasteland. No, I'm not saying it's that bad, but and I hate to use the word, but it taunts you a little bit. Like a Gear of the Wrath of God kind of taunts you in this way, because it takes the circles of hell and mixes it with, there's so much hope in us because there's money at the end of this, or there's so much hope in this because there's treasure at the end of the rainbow, or everybody in commercial culture, the more you buy, suddenly you get a big treasure for it. Like if buy 2, get 1 free, only that 3 is somehow more important because now it's a special gift, but you already paid for it. So I'm not saying that all German socialism is really what's running through these eras of the third generation and all these, 70s directors, and even Fassbender's coming along with that. And even in Berlin Alexanderplatz, you see this whole Reich, non-Reich relationship where they're all Well, disturbed by the socialism that they're not agreeing on, that they're socialists, but they're not agreeing on socialism. And that these directors aren't exactly not encountering the Holocaust, and by then there were things about the Holocaust that weren't even known until like the 90s or the 80s when they really started coming out with it, even though Charlie Chaplin had done The Great Dictator and we'd seen these concentration camps in The Great Dictator. So, Aguirre, the Wrath of God is almost saying that the death came when they thought there was treasure at the end of their crazy mission. And he's not saying anything about like Germans or anything in general, except that they've bought into the society that they can go like on this chaotic adventure and come out warriors as the setup. But anyone who's seen the movie, it's total oblivion wipeout. Total oblivion, wipeout into oblivion. So, Werner Herzog is taking these allegories of Aguirre, the Wrath of God, and saying there was no treasure at the end of the rainbow in these worlds. These worlds exist as moving images inside a rainbow itself, and that the treasure of the world is a picture of someone seeking treasure and not finding it, because that's the most glorious image you can give someone, is someone who's seeking treasure and not finding it. Because that means they went down with the ship looking for the treasure, and that's what Don Quixote did, and that's what his friend realized before he died, and he wished didn't tell him he wasn't a real knight. Because some people think it's funny if you think you're a knight and you're not, but that Don Quixote was a hero of his goal, that he was going for it, he was doing it, he was taking action, regardless if there was treasure or not. Maybe kind of hinting at, well, my girlfriend's really going to like me, Don Quixote says, and he's never actually met her, and she's in like a town 3 towns away. So if Quixote is also a way to go, I'm going to take on this giant tank, and Quixote almost seems like it's become a negative term, like it's lost. But what better than Werner Herzog saying, well, that they are lost, desperate, and dying is pretty much my favorite part, because here we have Lost, Desperate, and Dying, the movie, and now everybody wants to see Lost, Desperate, and Dying, because everyone deep down feels lost, desperate, and dying. So that you get such a good movie out of it is actually a capitalist kind of thing, because you're still getting the good movie. So just because the movie in the 70s is really realizing this all over the world, so just because the movie has a really downturn for ethics and morals that are making us feel kind of negative or down because everybody wipes out and dies, just remember the beauty in life is in our failures. That when we go down with failures, those were some of the best moments to get on photography, because we'll never forget, we'll always remember how bad we felt. But if we look at the picture, then we're like, doing the thing with Los Olvidados in here, where they have all this golden treasure with them, and they're dropping it everywhere. And why go look for more golden treasure when it's right there? Because you have to spend golden treasure to get more golden treasure. And this is Werner Herzog saying, in cinema, you take the money and you give it to the next film, and you pay off the original one. So you're in this constantly pay off, build one. And then they're paying off to build the big one to get to all these treasures of El Dorado. They go down with the ship, and the whole point is that they go down with the ship because that's what you want to see. And if everybody who loves Apocalypse Now, like Roger Ebert, who would basically throw you over his shoulder if you ever said anything bad about Apocalypse Now, which he threw me over his shoulder, but he didn't say anything bad about Apocalypse Now, and I didn't either. It was basically a bet that he couldn't finish a movie. And a Telluride, so we'll discuss that later. But Aguirre, the Wrath of God is like, maybe we won't actually, but Aguirre, the Wrath of God is just one of those. This is the glorious, like you see those oil paintings of like Van Eyck, and you're like, that's beautiful, because that oil painting looks like someone that's noble and regal and an errant, beautiful person, but that they look like they hit it with the bar, and that they were totally into the obsessive search for magic and its powers. And they were totally so obsessed with that they forgot they were painting. Is like, not like Werner Herzog, because he never forgets that he's there, but we all forget that like this is a movie, because now we feel like we're going there and we're not really given a sense of disappointment at the end. That it's horrible hijinks that everybody's dead and everybody's been killing each other and shooting each other and knocking them off the rafts and throwing them over, and now they're caught in this raft flow, like in the old days of the pioneers coming up the river. They're caught in this raft flow, and the raft flow drags them into this sort of flow that goes around by the river and keeps circulating around. And And so now that they're trapped in the hole, they all die because now they can't paddle the thing out of there. All their crew's lost. Now all that's left alive is one of those little monkeys that jump around on the ship. And they're so cute.
If you've raised kids,
but I don't really get this. This is the end. The apocalypse devastation is there. That everything's destroyed in its wake is there. That they lost all their treasure that they could have just kept and made their own kingdom. Is really weird that they had treasure anyway. It's like, let's take our treasure chest to the treasure chest. But that whole notion of going for something that looks like what it is but isn't has now become a gimmick itself. Like that is the Ahab syndrome, where everybody's going for the big one and they're so sure they won that even as a reader we're sitting there, well, he won at the end of that and he may not have died. Although the odds are he didn't win after that and may not have died, may have died. Whether the whale did or not, die or not, because it doesn't matter, because Ahab may or may not have died too. But that they all go underwater in a big wave is kind of what I'm getting, because it says the tidal streaks down, the tidal, Tidal, it streaks down into the ocean, and comes back out the other side. And
you become a member.
That
You're already a listener, so take a
Klaus Kinski is one of my heroes, and I saw this movie called My Best Fiend with one of my best fiends, Seren. And we watched this movie at the New Beverly, and we had just seen Aguirre, The Wrath of God. We were totally blown away by all this imagery and all these lightning crashes and all these things that were happening to Herzog as he was doing it, and how he's filming it, and his cinematographer is in it, and that there's all these production designers that are playing servants, and the servants are actually these actual natives that are trying to feed. And in Fitzcarraldo, they used real natives too, and they're not even like stereotyped. Like I was talking about stereotypes, the natives aren't stereotyped. And Klaus Kinski, from For a Few Dollars More all the way to his movies later, like Fitzcarraldo, he does transform from Fitzcarraldo to Nosferatu and Aguirre. We don't recognize him as the same person. We do, but we're not sitting there staring at him saying, that's the same Klaus Kinski. We're thinking, wow, Klaus Kinski does have a few different looks. And that he's in so many German films is an understatement. Then we're realizing Klaus Kinski is in like 100 German films, or like 120. And not all of them are Werner Herzog's. So we do applaud his career. We definitely applaud Werner Herzog, who's still alive, had made a movie after Fitzcarraldo even, and still in today's terms. He made a really clever movie that he showed at Telluride. I didn't meet him at Telluride necessarily, but he showed this cinema of nature where it was about this bear that lived in the woods, and it was called Grizzly Man. And the bear comes out, and he's studying the bear, and he's teaching the bear, and he's learning the bear. And it's, again, one of those, it's kind of chaotic, as we've said, that symptom has a negative connotation. Not that Don Quixote is really negative. He thought he was a knight for a while, so maybe he always is, right? If he thought it once, he may have always been. But in the movie Grizzly Man, you have the bear that sees the guy, and as the film's increasing, you know something weird's going to happen, because it's Werner Herzog getting close to his trap ending, which is coming. The bear sees the guy and eats him. And this guy was a real big science guy, and he'd been into it. And that the guy got eaten by the bear, and there's all these interviews with people that are like, it's astounding, his science. It's too bad it got eaten by the bear. And you're thinking, it's not Aguirre, but it has the same wipeout devastation. One other movie I'll mention, and then I'll close the class down, is there's a movie that Werner Herzog directed called Lessons of Darkness, and it's a documentary. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but the film doesn't really offend me, because it shows how evil it was to just drop bombs all over Kuwait, like before Kuwait attacked us as Americans. And I think what's interesting is Werner Herzog kind of has this American flavor, because he's made movies in America like Invincible, and he's still trying to get at what is really going on in the heart of national cinema. So now he's got this documentary that's from all this plain spy footage from the U.S. Army that they're giving him for free, and they're showing him that he has to go through a lot of channels to get. And seriously, that's a hard movie to track down, Lessons of Darkness. Like Heart of Glass, where they hypnotize all those guys, they burn glass thing. Lessons of Darkness, they got these planes coming in and blowing up the Middle East, and what you can see is these oil wells, and this is real footage. These oil wells, manned by Arabs, are being blown to smithereens up in the sky. And you're like, wow, can I see this? And that to me feels like the Werner Herzog. He doesn't want the things to be destroyed. He doesn't want his cast of Heart of Glass to end up on an island. He doesn't want the third generation to end up being a computer that tells everybody to F off like Alphaville does. It's Alphaville. Then in Aguirre, the Wrath of God, he does not want necessarily Klaus Kinski to become the number one guy, marry his daughter, and lord it over the apes, as they say in Citizen Kane. But hey, what you don't want to happen may not be the treasure at the end of the rainbow, though, and it may be worse, may be better. But if you got it worse or better than a movie, that doesn't really qualify you as being better or worse than a movie, because we've had feelings of emotions of wiping out from not getting our treasure that sometimes we freaking worked for. That we have to work for something to get it is undermined by our work for something impossible to get and still get it and wonder if it was nothing at the beginning but a mirage. And then if you can't always get what you want, then how did they get to the end of the movie wrecked? Unless they had supplies ample to do it. And if they had supplies ample to do it, then maybe beggars can't be choosers. Anyway, there's really no simple solution to any of these films. That they're built modern, that is no solution films, is so you remain with questions after the movie, and you ask questions about the movie and why it ended the way it did, and what are the three meanings of the film, and lust, power, and greed, and did greed come back into cinemas when Aguirre was being made, or after it was made, or that it's not about a wrath, but Roger Ebert compared it to Apocalypse Now, which looks a lot like Aguirre, the Wrath of God. And lastly, that the Searchers metaphor is where the Indians attack the place, they get the little girl and take her off into the desert, go off to their campground or whatever, their reservation, and then that John Wayne and all his friends go after the daughter, but they're on a suicide mission again and everybody's dying, and then they save the little girl at the last minute and only one of them's alive, so there's your happy ending. The treasure's a little hard to take in the Searchers because you're both like, well, everybody got their ass kicked and killed, but they brought the girl back, so that's cool. The girls, Natalie Wood's okay, we're good. But now that John Wayne's going back into the wilderness where all his friends are dead, where they're like, he loves living in the wilderness, but all his friends are dead. Anyway, thank you for joining Masterclass today. I thought it went very well. I hope you page me or text me if you're wondering if you need hints for the final, if you need any help getting these terms. I didn't use a lot of terms from the syntams this time. I felt they were episodic syntams. I usually feel movies are episodic syntams with brackets. Brackets. Brickets? There's some brickets for you. Brackets. The bracket syntram, where it brackets a syntam, modernizes the illusion and shows you the things that metaphoricalize, which are the images themselves, in kind of these stretched out long takes that are deep focused on these wide shots. There are these wide shots in both of those movies, Aguirre and Los Olvidados, and that the wide shots are elementalizing everything within the frame is because they're composing it to move within a frame so that it usually always matches what a painting looks like. That Aguirre has that off-color impressionism is strong with the fact that it's also got the jagged edge spear, giant hat expressionism, and giant helmet expressionism. And that if anything's sticking out big and everything, it's usually expressionism, which is why I think it's weird in Gospel according to St. Matthew, that Pope dude's got a 10-gallon hat on, and I'm not even sure if there was a Pope at Jesus' time, and I'm a religious student. Come on now. So we thank you for joining. We thank you for coming. We've talked about a lot, and I hope to see you for the last 5 classes of semester 2 of YouTube Masterclass Coursera. Thank you.